Whoa, I look really yellow. Yeah, whatever. Hey guys, so welcome back to another video, and today we're gonna go on a bit of an interesting topic. Now this is a topic I feel is something now that, like, you know, I was always concerned about it, but something I was concerned about more ever since I obviously am, at this point now, 31 weeks pregnant with my first child. And of course, gaming is a huge part of my life, as it is a huge part of my husband's life as well. So, of course, there is obviously the whole thing of video games and kids. You know, should they be playing them? If they're exposed to them, you get definitely the big, like, kind of Moms of America group who are like, no, your children shouldn't see, you know, any of the violent video games or anything, only Animal Crossing, if even something like Animal Crossing is considered acceptable. But, you know, you don't go past, it's this whole thing of, like, you don't, you know, show your kids video games, and they have this argument that, you know, oh, it'll scare them, it'll make them into, you know, violent people or whatever. But of course, as it has been proven, video games don't make people violent because, well, one, I don't see every gamer suddenly wanting to, you know, beat up the barista at Starbucks because they got their coffee wrong or something. Throwing a little shade here, maybe, because we all know the certain people who do. Karen's looking at you. But my main point is, you know, you don't see, like, just because someone plays video games doesn't mean they're automatically violent. Like, you know, you have the people who, oh, they, you know, ended up being violent and, like, tons of anime and manga and video games were found in their room, and it's like, so yeah, they were into that, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're a violent person, because if you want to make that case, then I guess all the people watching true crime documentaries and just like Dexter especially and like NCIS and stuff, I guess they're violent too, because they're sure watching a lot of murder and murder mysteries, so I guess they must be violent too. Well, shoot, I watched Dexter, so I guess I'm in that category. But either way, you know, we have the playing video games doesn't automatically make you violent. If you have the disposition for violence, like, you can live, you know, a sheltered, you're only watching little Einsteins on TV all the way up until you're 18. And if you have the disposition and, like, the mindset that you are violent, you're gonna end up somehow being violent. So, let's be real, that flat-out argument isn't true. But of course, people want the proof, and there's still the debate of should your 2-3-year-old be seeing, you know, any, like, scary images, like games like Mortal Kombat or even God of War, where it's all violent and, you know, you see a ton of gore, and then there's like the horror games, like, should they be watching you play Silent Hill? Should they be watching you play Dead Space? Who remembers Dead Space? I only even knew it was a thing. Like, I've never actually played it. My husband loves it, but who remembers Dead Space was a thing? So, today, we're gonna look and kind of answer that question. Now, this is, disclaimer, this is coming from someone who, like I said, this is my first child. I do not have any children, so I have not had the first-hand experience with it, but this is something obviously my husband and I have talked about, considering we are both big gamers, and while I am into, you know, a pretty big variety of video games, like, I like a lot of Nintendo that's more lighthearted, friendly and stuff, but my husband, and there's nothing wrong with this, he is into the games that have more mature content, like Call of Duty and Mortal Kombat, and, you know, like, he loves, well, WoW doesn't really have a lot of, like, violence, but he's into the more maturely themed games. So obviously it affects him in a big way, and it even in a way affects me too, because, for instance, you know, right now I'm playing The Last of Us. It'd be like, well, can I play that if the kids are, you know, awake and in the room and doing their own thing? So we're gonna look at that. So we're gonna pose a hypothetical situation here. Now, I want you to watch this next clip. I'm sure a lot of you, of course, have seen it, because this is a clip from Resident Evil 3, the 2020 remake that came out a few months ago. But in case there are, you know, any moms out there who don't know, or even dads, because, you know, it could be the mom that's into the video games, or like, you know, one parent is into the video games and one is not. So for the one who is not into video games, and maybe you've stumbled across this video, you know nothing about video games, I want you to just watch this next clip. It's not super scary, there's definitely no gore or like anything super explicit or anything. Just watch this next clip, and then we're gonna pose a scenario here.
Hello?
Jill, are you okay?
Brad, is that you?
Listen, you gotta get out of there.
What are you talking about?
I don't have time to explain. You gotta get out of there right now.
All right, let me grab my...
Alright, so let's take this for example now. Let's say you have said, no, my children will not be exposed to that, they cannot see that. You can only play those games on the TV once they are in bed. So you send little Tommy, we're gonna go with Tommy, I don't know why. We're gonna send little Tommy up to bed. Or down the hall to bed, I don't know. We live in a 2-story, so we're gonna go with up to bed, okay? Stairs, hall, whatever, it doesn't matter. Point is, you send little Tommy to bed. So the gamer, you know, sets up is like, you know what, I want to play Resident Evil 3. When you're gaming, you don't want to have all the glare off the TV, and especially at night, even though you normally have a ton of lights on so you can see, a lot of gamers, and, you know, me included, I like to try and have more lights off, because it just makes the experience more enjoyable, and then you're making sure you're not accidentally getting any glare, especially if it is a darker game, where it's harder to see anyway. You want it dark around you so you have a better chance of seeing. So, take that scenario, you put it in that kind of environment. Now, little Tommy, unbeknownst to you, got up at some point to go to the bathroom or whatever, or even to just specifically try and sneak into the living room to see what mom and dad are doing. Cause let's be real, what kid hasn't done this? I know I did this. And there's even a specific scenario of me catching a glimpse of a Jurassic Park movie that my mom had told me I couldn't watch because I did this exactly. Little Tommy sneaks to the living room. You don't hear him, you don't see him and realize he's there. He's peeking around the corner, and he sees that clip I just showed you. Big old Nemesis just breaking in and starting to beat the crap out of Jill. Now, of course, Tommy's not going to say anything because he doesn't want to get busted for the fact he was out of bed past bedtime. So what does he do? He runs to his bed. In his dark room, maybe he has a nightlight, but it's still a dark room, by himself at night, to then try and process what he just saw by himself. No one there to explain anything. No one there to give him any kind of comfort. The scenario, like, it was scarier scenario because it was all dark. And, you know, he's now on his own trying to process what he just saw because he hasn't seen anything like that. Now, let's take the scenario and let's say it is a mom it is the parents who do let their child be exposed to this kind of thing. So you have little Tommy, you know, sitting on the couch, or maybe he's sitting and playing his own, you know, toys or whatever, but he's paying attention. You got the lights on because, you know, obviously the kid's there. Mom and dad are in the room, or the lights are on. He's sitting next to dad or sitting on his lap or whatever, you know. And he sees that scene. Well, for starters, he's been exposed to it in a more open and comforting type of environment because there are lights on. He has his parents with him. Even if there's not as many lights on, still, he has his parents with him. He knows they're there. They're right next to him. Dad, or whoever is playing the game, can now explain or even just ask, like, okay, do you have any questions about what you just saw? Or they can explain, hey, this is a video game, it's fake, you see that? That's a bad guy, but Remember, it's a fake video game. You know how like your TV shows show imagination and all that stuff you like, and you use your imagination and everything? Well, a video game, this is the exact same thing. He's not a real thing. He can't hurt you. And then as you go through even, you can show Jill gets away, she beats him, and then when the other zombies show up, shows like, hey, look at this. You can overcome the scary thing. The scary thing isn't automatically just going to hurt you. And at the end of the day, it's fake imagery. It's a game. It's all fake. So now, little Tommy it's okay. He saw this in a proper, like, a more friendly and warm and welcome, where he felt safe environment. And any questions or misunderstandings he has, he can just outright ask and have it explained to him. Where in that first scenario, he didn't know what he saw, he didn't know what was going on, and he was left to then try and piece it together himself. And he's probably not ever going to come to you to ask about it until years and years later, after he's already scarred himself with it, because he thinks he's going to get in trouble or something. He doesn't want to admit that he snuck out of bed and saw something on TV when he was supposed to be sleeping. When you think about it, it just creates this kind of scenario. Now, of course, that's not to say, all forms of violent or graphic media should be shown. We're going to look at another game to kind of show, because this is, of all the games we have, this is the only game we have that is on the automatic no, it is not going to be shown in front of the very young children list. So let's go ahead and talk about that. So, as we can see here, we have a game that's presented in just picture style, so it's not even as vibrant and moving. And, as you can clearly see by me just kind of clicking through, there is a lot of text, aka young children won't be able to read this. It's a very story-heavy game. They're going to have a lot harder time comprehending it, because one, it is more grown-up, and there is just a lot of, like, words and stuff that they don't know how to read, and with it being so, there's so much lore and everything, it's very hard to explain in a horror story in a way that they won't be freaked out. And there's all these ambient noises and everything, and just the way in which it is presented and how you get the story is not gonna work. Now, that's one argument for the sake of this. If we watch here, we're gonna get to something else. Alright, so now we see a doll sitting there. For anyone who hasn't played this game, this doll, spoiler alert, turns out to be something extremely creepy. And the fact it's kind of creepy to begin with anyway, and a lot of the enemies are kind of doll-like looking, children are gonna be terrified because they have dolls. So for things like this, it makes perfect sense that we're not gonna show our kids this. They're gonna become scared of their own toys. This is something they need to be older to digest and whatnot. This kind of game, for all those reasons, it's just a no-go with young children. Let's be real, we're not stupid and purposely trying to scar our children here, now are we? Okay, so first we're gonna look, this isn't a scientific study, but I do think in this scenario you don't need just all scientific studies. I do think that it is actually helpful to get just perspective just from people who are parents and they play games and everything. So this is going to come off Reddit. By the way, all the links for these I'm going to put down below in the description, so you can go ahead and read them yourself. That way you know I'm not making anything up or whatever. So we have on r/parenting, this is off the Reddit, do you play violent, scary video games in front of your kids? If you don't play video games, do you let them watch scary, violent shows or movies? My son is 4 and I can't afford to sleep too late because I have to wake up early. Me being a fan of Fallout, have bought the game and played in front of him like 5 minutes max because I take it off when ghouls or other creatures appear, which is very often, so I don't make a lot of progress. I also play here and there when he goes to sleep, but again, with the sleep issue, I don't get to play a lot. My question really is, how could this affect him? I don't want him to be traumatized for life, but when I was a kid, as young as 3, I was watching scary, violent movies, Chucky, It, and I came out fine, but I'm scared he might become violent or something. Does anybody have any experience with this, and what would be an appropriate or better age. Edit, I forgot to mention that I make sure to tell him it's not real and he seems to get it. So it poses the question, and he also made a good point of like he had grown up with violent media. Something to note too, my husband, he grew up, you know, as young as 5 years old playing, I can't remember off the top of my head, but some kind of like scary or violent video game when he was 5, and he's turned out perfectly, well, as normal as he can be. He's weird in different reasons. He's not just a violent maniac, okay? So, someone answered with an interesting answer. Now, there are some people who, you know, of course, people have different opinions. And like, for instance, this first one is, my kid is 4 and occasionally my bloke will watch something scary, violent, tell kiddo that he's watching a grown-up program and not to watch, so she'll go play in her room or outside or something. So, you know, that can be one way to do it. And when you think about it, a lot of times, kids, they're not dumb, but for something that is more of an adult program, or like a game or something with how more adult it can be, they're probably not even going to be that interested and necessarily be sitting and watching you play a video game for 2 hours straight or whatever. More than likely, they're going to go get up, play with their toys. They're probably going to sit there and be like, can we turn on SpongeBob? Or whatever else they want to watch, whatever program they're always wanting to watch. Chances are, they're probably going to lose interest. Kids can jump from thing to thing pretty quick. They get tired of one thing. They'll maybe last 5 minutes on it and then have to want to go do something else because they got bored. So that's just another note to keep in mind. So, someone answered to that, see, usually I do this. I tell him not to watch whatever show because it's scarier for adults and he will go and play with his toys or my phone. But he has a thing for video games and I'll tell him to play with my phone or close his eyes and he refuses to. So I started letting him watch and so far I haven't had a problem with it. But I do worry sometimes. So of course you're going to worry because you want to be the best parent you can be. You want to make sure you're doing everything right. But here's even an example of sometimes kids are going to be a little more stubborn and they're going to see it. That doesn't necessarily mean it is 100% going to affect them and scar them. Because as I said, it is being put in a scenario of it's probably a more brightly lit room. They're with mom and dad. There's no like danger feeling in the air in the room. So it has a different kind of effect and feeling on them. So, someone else made an interesting point. I wait till my 4-year-old goes to bed. I would not play Fallout 4. I don't know what that one is. Or GTA 5 with him there. There's just no way they can separate fantasy from reality at that age nor process the imagery. A 4-year-old internalizes and processes everything he sees. That being said, I will let him fly planes with me in GTA 5 occasionally. So, in that regard, I do feel like there is a little bit of not truth in there. I mean, yes, kids can have a bit harder time understanding, you know, between fiction and reality, but at the same time too, you watch shows. You know, when I was a kid, I'd watch a ton of shows with animals, and they talk. Did I ever then think our German Shepherd growing up was gonna talk? I mean, I wish she could. Heck, I wish my dog could talk now and I'm 25. But the thing was, I realized there was a difference between the cartoon dogs I was seeing on TV and my real dog sitting over here who... she doesn't have the same kind of thinking process for starters, and she's not gonna just start talking like the dogs on TV that I was watching. She's a real dog, they're a cartoon dog. And even then, a lot of the times, if you explain it to kids like, hey, that's a cartoon dog, that's why our dog doesn't talk, it's not real, it's imaginary, they can get it. Kids are smarter than we give them credit for. So there is one more on this Reddit post of an answer that I want to read, and it's a bit of a long one, so bear with me. So my 4-year-old daughter is a bit of a ninja. I thought she had gone to sleep and started watching The Walking Dead. About 30 minutes in, I turn around and notice she's sitting on the couch behind me, all snuggled into a blanket and watching intently. My wife was walking around in the other room, busy with her own stuff, and hadn't noticed my daughter sitting behind me for over 25 minutes prior. Wife didn't pay attention to the TV as she figured I knew daughter was there. I sat next to her after the commercial break and she started asking questions. Things like, who is the good guy? Who's the bad guy? What are those? I don't know if what I did was right or wrong, but I just basically told her it's a zombie show. To my surprise, she started comparing it to some cartoon she watched called Monster High and the Paranorman movie. Well, it turns out she wasn't scared, didn't think it was real, and then asked if she'd be a princess zombie for Halloween. Every kid's different, and I would have never really exposed her to this on purpose, but it's surprising what doesn't affect them when explained in context. So that's another thing too, even when you think about it. So Monster High, it was something I was never into. By the time Monster High really started getting big, I was too old for it. But you see these shows and everything where they show it in, you know, like even vampires, because I worked at Spirit Halloween last year. There's this, I guess, Nickelodeon show called like Vampirina? Little Vampire? I don't remember what it was called. Something about a little girl vampire. And it's made all cutesy and friendly for them. So it shows they understand, you know, these shows expose kids to here's these things. So they get an understanding from them. And then let's say, you know, like then with The Walking Dead, be like, okay, well, this is a bit of a different side of zombies. But again, the thing was, she saw an environment with her dad. Lights were probably on or something, or even if lights weren't on, she saw it with her dad. And more than anything, as any kid, she just wanted answers and an explanation for what she was seeing. And once she got that, she was fine. Like, there was no harm, no foul. So to assume that all kids are going to automatically be ruined by that, it's not really helping anyone. Because clearly it's not the case. Now, there are some kids who will be more sensitive to stuff, so, you know, take it by a case-by-case thing, but you can start to get a feel for what your kids are seeing. Now, if you're exposing them to something like that and they get a little freaked out, of course, then, you know, it's like, okay, our child can't handle this, so we need to figure something out. Right, so the last article I want to look at is from sheknows.com. Like I said, I'm going to post the link below. It's on parenting. So it's a bit more kind of like a news article site, so let's read a little bit into it. The very first fight I had with my husband came long before I was even showing him my pregnancy. It was an extremely loud disagreement about whether or not our child would ever play video games. I was staunchly against the idea, while my husband, who was at the time learning to make them, was obviously for it. It was a stupid fight about the possibility of our kid doing something far in the future, and like all stupid fights, it eventually ended in a begrudging compromise. She could play games, but not the violent ones. My staunch opposition is embarrassing now, but in my defense, I was raised to believe that video games were at best an inferior form of entertainment for people with no at worst, imagination. At worst, they make Jesus cry. Which, in a lot of ways, growing up in a conservative Christian home, my parents were a little more lenient, but at the same time, they were rather strict on the video games my brother and I could play, so my brother and I grew up in this kind of environment as well, which is why it might surprise you that not even a year ago, I found myself talking to my daughter in a bathroom at the studio where my husband works, uttering the totally reasonable phrase, "Do you want to talk about the part where the bad guy was sliced in half by a chainsaw, honey?" Obviously, a lot changed between that early pregnancy fight and the late evening bathroom discussion. It's a long story. Actually, it's not. I mostly just got over myself. When my husband's studio hosted a showing of the latest promotional video for the game he was working on, she begged to be allowed to watch it too. We reluctantly agreed, but not before many fraught discussions between the parents and a few hundred endlessly fascinating lectures about the value of not telling other little blabbermouth kids what we were about to let her do. We told ourselves she was mature and had context for the scary stuff and would probably not freak out. Still, I couldn't help but wonder if we'd overshot the mark. I'd at least always planned to stick to my no violence stuff rule, and yet there I was listening to my daughter tell me that she was fine, reciting her dad's lecture about the difference between fantasy violence and real violence, and how killing a fake demon is different than killing a real person, back to me word for word. She survived the experience unscathed and nightmare-free. I'm going to post the rest of that article below, because I'm not going to read the whole thing, but that's just the beginning of explaining. So, because, well, let me tell you a little on how I was at first. I was the same way. When we first found out we were pregnant, and I was sitting there saying, no, we're not gonna play violent video games in front of our kids. As much as I enjoy, like I said, my last video was just on God of War 2018. Decently violent video game. I'm playing The Last of Us right now. Like, I'm no stranger to violent horror related video games, and I enjoy them. But I had said not in front of the kids because I just grew up with this thing of don't expose it to the kids, and thinking that if I expose that to the kids, that would be forcing them to grow up before they're ready, and that somehow that means they're not ever going to, you know, take in any child-friendly media, when obviously that's not the case. We're not going to be sitting there playing violent video games 24/7 or whatever. Like, they're going to be doing other stuff, of course. And the thing with this is, a lot of it is context. If you sit down and can explain with your child, this is fake, this is imaginary, here's the differences between things, kids can understand. Yes, they do tend to have a little bit more of a disconnect between like reality and fantasy. Like, let's say they will assume the Pooh Bear, the person dressed up in the Pooh Bear costume they see at Disneyland is real. But that's the thing, is that is still something they can tangibly see that they assume is real. Nemesis from Resident Evil, unless you take them to a convention where there happens to be a Nemesis cosplayer, they're not ever going to see Nemesis in like real life as a real 3D object. You can explain to kids how, hey, you know how it's the same as, you know how you watch your TV show and your TV show's not real? We're not all a bunch of anthropomorphic animals singing and dancing? Well, it's the same concept with the video games. You just have to be willing to sit and talk and explain. Now, of course, there are some things, such as earlier with the example of Deathmark, and with, you know, the way the game is set up, and the fact it's a creepy doll, which they do have dolls. There are, of course, some things you don't let your kids watch. Like, there will be plenty of horror movies that the kids aren't gonna watch. I ain't letting them watch Annabelle. Like, they're gonna be freaked out, you know? There are certain things, obviously, you do still censor on, but there's a lot more you really don't have to censor on than you realize. While I, of course, can't make the decision for you, I would love, if you are in this argument right now, do a little more research, and I'm not saying you're right or wrong either way in your decision, but just consider doing a little more research and looking into things before you just immediately write them off. That is going to be it for today. Go ahead, leave your thoughts in the comments below. Let's have a discussion. Again, I'm not saying you're right or wrong either way. If you decide you don't want your kids, you know, being exposed to video games or whatever, that's your thing. They're your kids. You can raise them how you want. I'm not trying to shame or judge any parents here. So, you know, no attacking in the comments. Let's have an open discussion about this. If you want to keep up to date on future videos, I suggest following my Twitter. If you want to see pictures of my dog, who, for once, she's not in here. She's downstairs asleep on the couch, tired from her walk. Go ahead and follow my Instagram, because sometimes I post pictures of me and my husband, but it's mostly my dog. Let's be real. Go ahead and give this video a like if you did enjoy it, and you don't have to like it even if you did enjoy it, but it just kind of helps me, you know, let me know what people like, what they were interested in seeing and talking about. If you want to see more videos like this, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. I upload every Monday and Friday, and then vlogs whenever I feel like it. That is all for today, and thank you so much for watching. Bye!